So now we're going to start looking at our analysis modes, starting with the spectrum analysis. Before we jump in and look at this, I want to show you the common controls that relate to all of our analysis modes. So they are located down here where it says display. So spectrum, correlation, stereo image, dynamics, and loudness, no matter what we click on, this area will remain the same. And this refers to the way in which we're going to visualize our two tracks. So let's put it on single. Now in this mode, we're just looking at stream A, as you can see there. Flick across to our reference. We're just seeing stream B. In dual mode, we're going to visualize both tracks, one on top of the other. And in layered mode, we're going to see the two tracks layered. Super useful. Now, I would say when we're in spectrum analysis mode, if you have both peak and average on, this gets a little bit confusing. So maybe it's a good idea just to look at one of those when we're in layered mode. It's a bit cleaner, but don't worry about that for now because we're going to come back to that anyway, but that was just a little aside. Okay, so these are going to remain the same, as I said, for each one of our analysis modes. So no matter what we're looking at, we can choose to visualize in those different ways. Okay, so the other options we have here is essentially a play for the analysis. So if we switch that off, we can just refer to the two tracks or reference the two tracks without having to be confused by seeing lots of information changing. Switch it back on. And we're back into analysis. Now we can reset from here as well. So it's going to redraw the analysis. And if we're working with hold values here, it's going to update those two, which is quite useful. And we can also have a kind of latch mode for the DAW. So when we actually press play in our DAW, it will start drawing the analysis as well. And they are all going to remain the same no matter which one of our analysis modes is active. Okay, so let's dive in and look at the spectrum analysis now. Now, the spectrum analysis allows us to visualize the frequency spectrum of our track and the reference track. And this is now going to be your new favorite spectrum analyzer. It's really an incredible spectrum analyzer. Now, first of all, when we come onto the spectrum analyzer, we're moving from the lowest area of our human hearing range up to the highest area, so 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And when we move through, you can see the crosshair tool here tells us what frequency we're at and what decibel value we're at. So if we were thinking, oh, what's going on down here? Well, that's about 50 hertz, 52 hertz, and its average level is about minus 24 dB. Let's go on to peak. So we're peaking at about minus 12 at about 50 hertz. So that's straight off the bat quite useful just to be able to see what area of the frequency spectrum we're looking at essentially, or we're working at. Okay, so we can visualize this information in different ways. And that's changed from this menu here. Plot is the kind of traditional spectrum analyzer approach. Octave means we can separate this into octaves. Third octave is going to give us a bit more resolution. Let's kind of split into third of octaves. Critical is going to reflect the kind of weighting that we have through the frequency spectrum. So obviously, when we go into the sub-range, the notes are far further apart than they are when we go higher up. So that's kind of reflected in this critical mode here as well. And then we have multi, which gives us kind of a tonal balance essentially across multiple bands. So different ways of visualizing what's going on. It might be sometimes a bit clearer. Let's put it onto layered mode to use, say, octave or even multi, in fact. You can see a bit more what's going on, especially if we start to look at an averaging rather than a peak. So we can really effectively compare two tracks. Let's try these two tracks, which are actually much more similar. as we flick between the two, you'll see that whichever one we have selected is kind of the dominant track within the display. So it gets a bit bigger. So here, these columns are a little bit bigger here than the other track. And in this case, because we've selected this track, these columns become a bit bigger. So you can kind of choose which one you want to focus on. So that's the different ways we can visualize the frequency spectrum. Now, what can we do in terms of how we visualize the level, essentially? Well, we can do it as peak here. Okay, and we're looking at the two tracks together there. Now, we have ballistics for the different meters here. Now, this is kind of determining how responsive it is, how fast it is. So it can be super fast if we go up, or we can slow it right down. Like so. So you can set that up exactly the way that kind of reflects the way you want to visualize things. And you can actually save it as a default if you want to, or you can also restore to the default that way as well. So that's really useful. Okay, I'm just going to change the reference track because those ones are quite similar. So let's look at something which is a bit different. This one's kind of tonally a little bit different, so it's going to show up a few things a bit more. Now, as well as peak, we can actually hold the peak values over this time period, which in this case is 1 second. So this is going to be held a bit more, you can see there, not as responsive. So again, that's a little bit more of a handy way of visualizing things, and it shows us actually there's a lot more low end in my new track than there is in my reference track here, but there's more mid-range or upper mids kind of area in the reference track, for example. Now, we can make this a bit slower until it really just kind of holds in place like so. Okay, let's switch off the hold now. And let's have a look at average. Now, this is going to take an RMS level, essentially, of the track, which in some ways reflects a little bit more the way that we hear. Now, again, we can change the ballistics for this. So we can make it really, really slow to the point where it's infinite, which is going to give us a good snapshot of the whole track, essentially. And again, look at the amazing information this is telling us. Much more in the kind of 100 hertz area in my new track, much more in the fundamental frequency of the kick, and all this low area down here. And that might be something I might want to look at. I might say, okay, well, why have I got so much information at 16 hertz? I need to do some more low cutting on the track. But maybe it might tell me that actually my old track is a little bit too light in that area and I've gone a bit too far with the low cut in mastering or something. So, just because there's information there doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong. So averaging, we can change the ballistics to be faster or slower again, to give us exactly the readout we're looking for. And as I said, we can save that as a default if we wanted to as well. We have hold for the average value as well. So a bit more responsive. Let's make it much more responsive in terms of the level here. And if we hold it, it kind of just holds it a little bit more in time. It's a little bit more obvious when it comes to the peak value when we switch on hold. But super useful information from the Spectrum Analyzer there. Okay, now we have two options here, Zoom dB and Zoom Hertz. Now, Zoom dB will allow us to essentially zoom in on the spectrum so we can actually hone in on a certain area of the level meter, essentially, or the level readings. So let's go to peak. So now we're looking at the top kind of 30 dB in terms of our peak level. Let's take it off hold. So we can see the difference in kind of punchiness when it comes to that fundamental area of the kick between the two tracks. You can see this one's just hitting much higher than this one here. Let's actually slow this down a little bit. And it's saying, okay, so there's about an 8 dB difference between the two tracks in terms of the fundamental frequencies, peak values, the kind of punch of that area there. So that's something we can work out by using this zoom option. Now we can switch this off as well, just to toggle it like so. We can also just drag it back down to reset it to the default value. Now, the filters also kind of work with the Spectrum Analyzer as well. So when we click on any of our presets here, you can see it actually hones in on the area of the frequency spectrum visually. So this is quite interesting. So let's compare these two low ends that have such a kind of big difference to them. So you can hear the difference in punch when we hone in on that area. Now, I really like this Love Shine Down reference track. This is a track that I actually released on the French label Kitsune. It's something I was very proud of. But I think actually this new track I'm working on has probably more of a kind of groovy, danceable low end. More punchy compared to this one, which is a little bit more kind of flat sounding, not as much separation between the bass and the kick. Very different styles. Hopefully not too different, but yeah, you can hear the difference there. And being able to hear it honed in that way is really, really useful. So the Spectrum Analyzer will show us that information. Now, what we can also do as well is zoom in on certain areas of the frequency spectrum like so. So let's say we wanted to just look at the low end. Okay, so let's say we do everything below 300. So again, this is really showing us what's going on in this low end. Okay, we can switch that on and off like so. Or what we can do is actually have these linked together. So this now means that we're linking what's going to be shown here with what we're selecting with the filters. Just the high frequencies, just the mid-range, for example, just the sub, just the bass, low mid. Super useful. So that way we can link these two controls together. So this is, as I said, your new favorite Spectrum Analyzer, or at least it is my new favorite Spectrum Analyzer. I find it super useful, really, really intuitive, and a great way to be able to compare two different tracks to see what the difference is. Now, let me just say that when it comes to this zoom option we talked about, this actually only works within the plot view. So it's no longer actually zooming in on the frequency spectrum when we're in a different view. So that's just in plot view. Okay, so in this video, we've covered the common controls and also the Spectrum Analyzer. Common controls, we can choose to visualize just one track, both tracks stacked on top of each other, layered on top of each other. We can choose to draw the analysis using the play button, reset it, and also latch it to the project, the DAW essentially. Then we can choose to view peak, hold, and average level. And we've got ballistics to speed up or slow down the response of these controls, which allows us to kind of see the information a little bit slower, which in some ways is a bit more useful for actually trying to compare two tracks. We can visualize this as a plot, octave, a bit more resolution with thirds of octaves, critical, and kind of a multi-band approach. And then we can zoom in on the dB scale here, different areas to see kind of peak values, for example. And we can also zoom in on different areas of the frequency spectrum. And this can be tied in with the filter selection as well, which I think for most applications is going to be quite useful. And that is the amazing Spectrum Analyzer from Metric AB. In the next video, we're going to jump across and have a look at our correlation. So I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.